All right, guys, welcome. Really sorry about the delay and technical difficulties we were having. I don't know what's going on, but there's appears to have been a problem with the link where for some reason we've got a capacity set on it and there was some issues getting folks admitted and a bunch of other stuff, but appreciate you guys bearing with us and sorry for that. Without further delay, because we're already getting started 8 minutes late, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Bob and let him go ahead and get us kicked off. He probably needs no introduction for most of you, but I will allow him to introduce himself as he sees fit. So Bob, if you wouldn't mind, please take us away.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Again, apologize for the problems getting jump started here, but if any group can adapt to hiccups in the road, it's the health and safety people, right? We all know you start off the day trying to do one thing and it doesn't exactly work that way. So anyhow, my name is Bob Emery, and I'll show you a glamour photo here in a second. But what I want to talk about today is this notion of collegial peer reviews amongst EH&S programs. And I'll explain the process and how we got involved with it, but also the common issues we encounter, but some of the simple solutions. And then I'll wrap up with maybe some suggestions for the SHEMA leadership to consider. So I want to frame this discussion with the acknowledgement of three practical realities that we face in college and university EH&S. And I'll talk about the collegial peer review process that we have here within the University of Texas system. And then I'm going to summarize the 15 common issues that I repeatedly encounter. And I will, as full disclosure, I will tell you that this is subject to bias, my personal biases, but I'll at least share with you what I see as a common issue, but more importantly, talk about the solutions that can be applied. And then summarize with some specific training opportunities that SHEMA can consider, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions. And by the way, don't be shy to use the chat box or interrupt by all means. This is the university approved glamour photo of Emery. I've got 38 years of safety stuff in higher education. My position's a bit unusual that I'm 85% administration, in other words, over safety, and then 15% faculty. In 1998, we created this EHS Academy, which is a boot camp for people coming in to understand how universities work. But perhaps most importantly here is that I just finished my 40th collegial university program peer review. And that's got to be a world record. And I'll explain why that happened. The next important thing is I think I've experienced every dimension of the university environment. All of us here on this call have been students, and then have been a staff member, then a faculty, then an alumni, and now a tuition payer. And then I was told by my colleague, Scott Patlovich, the ultimate last part of this would be a donor to the Willed Body program. So that might close the circuit on the whole academic experience. So, one of my primary academic interests is this notion of quantifying the value of prevention, because all of us who work in health and safety, our goal at the end of the day is to help people go home as healthy and as safe as they come in the door. But unfortunately, we have to do a better job at capturing the data to explain all the efforts that went on to make nothing happen, so to speak. So the other thing, contextual information I want to cover very quickly is that there are three realities that I've learned over my career. Number one is universities compare many things. And I'm not going to read this whole list, but universities look to their left and their right, and they say, how many students, what are we paying for tuition, what are our rankings, SAT scores, blah, blah, blah. Yet within our ranks, within the SHEMA ranks, there are still those who feel as though the EH&S programs cannot be compared because everybody's a special snowflake. And I would argue that's ridiculous because all of these different things, college campuses, university campuses compare each other all the time. So some interesting quotes here. While individuals are insolvable puzzles, in aggregate, they become mathematical certainties. And that is true. And then I love this last quote, comparison is the mother of insight. So whether you like it or not, you are being compared, your program is being compared to other programs to your left and your right. So that's one reality. The second one is the constancy of change. And I've given this talk many times, not this particular talk, but I've asked, how long have you as a safety person, reported to the person you report to? Not the position, but how long have you reported to the person you report to? And the results are strikingly consistent. 80% have reported to the person they report to for less than 5 years in the university environment, and 25% for less than a year. So if you flip that data around, what that says is that most practicing safety professionals can expect to have between 6 and 30 different bosses over a 30-year working career. That's very significant, because we already have a challenge of trying to tell the story about what didn't happen, but now we have to tell it repeatedly because there's so much turnover that's occurring within the administration. And I would cause you to pause for a second and think about the leader retirements that are coming in the next 5 years. The bad news, there's going to be a loss of vast institutional knowledge and experience and wisdom. But the good news is it will bring in fresh ideas, perspectives, energy, and comfort with technology. So that notion of constancy of change is really important. And then the third reality is that we, as safety folks, are hardwired to collect data for regulatory purposes. And a good example here is pounds of hazardous waste. So all of us are under RCRA in some form or fashion. And so we have to maintain data on the amount of hazardous waste generated each year. But we are not compelled to collect the data on the number of individual pickups that were necessary to provide these services and to make the waste go away. And so the point I guess I'm trying to make here is that what I encounter a lot is people who have data for compliance purposes, but they don't have data for performance purposes. And so I would argue that in our profession, we need to think about that as we go about our activities to make sure we have data to speak to that. The same thing with number of people trained or with regard to someone getting hurt. Okay, so let's talk about the peer review process. So what happened is the University of Texas system has 14 individual institutions spread across the state of Texas. And it was about 25 years ago, I guess, but the idea was, maybe best if we have knowledgeable people, individuals come in from outside and do a collegial peer review of the safety program on these respective campuses. And so we are held to the obligation that every 3 years we undergo a peer review. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to have ours in February of 2022. Anyhow, word leaked out about this. And then other institutions started contacting us about doing these sorts of peer reviews. And so how it normally plays out is that there's an initial inquiry, and it's usually some university administrator who under their portfolio has health and safety, but they really don't know what it is they do. And when they talk to their colleagues, somehow or another, Emery's name shows up. And I do want to emphasize, we don't advertise. Somehow they find us. I don't understand that. But really, when I have these conversations, I always tell people, look, just be clear, this is not an inspection. This is a collegial review to say, hey, this looks good. You might want to think about this. We provide a list of the common stakeholders to be interviewed, and I'm happy to share these lists with whoever might be interested here. But it's people that we commonly interact with: animal care, facilities, police, that sort of thing. And then we also provide a list of the common questions asked so that no one gets caught flat-footed. What works well? What doesn't work so well? What do you want to do? Oftentimes in these meetings, we make the offer that if you want, so that the EH&S staff isn't apprehensive, that we can actually do a training session at lunchtime to say, hey, you can talk about benchmarking or whatever it is you want to talk about. So to fold in that, it seems to reduce the blood pressure for folks. And then we draft a report that consists of bullet observations and suggestions. That's then sent to the host campus to say, is this correct? Are you guys fine with this? And then once it's reviewed and refined, then a final signed report is provided. Matter of fact, we just did this for a campus last week. What a peer review is not is something like this, where someone comes in and is, rattling people and also, complaining and that sort of stuff. That is not the goal for a peer review. It's more collegial. Really want to underscore the notion of a collegial. Now, an interesting point here is what spurs a peer review request. And I see that there are essentially 4 categories. It may be that the EH&S program genuinely wishes for a collegial, continuous quality improvement assessment by someone who understands what the heck EH&S does, rather than maybe bringing in institutional audit or something like that. That's one option. It could be an existing administrator who really doesn't understand what EH&S does and how much is needed. And I'll get to the benchmarking part here in a little bit. Or it could be a new administrator who has EH&S under his or her portfolio, but doesn't really know what it is they do and how much is needed. Or it could be that something bad happened. And normally when I get those calls, that's when the request is coming under attorney-client privilege. And I try to talk them back from the ledge on that kind of stuff, but because that's not my favorite pastime on those sorts of things. But that's what seems to drive the different peer review requests. Okay, so I'm going to go through 15 of these. I'll do it somewhat quickly, but these are just my observations and my colleagues that have traveled with me. Again, they are subject to bias, but that's okay. But I feel as though after doing 40 of these, they seem to be true. Number one issue is that the programs are not conducting operation as a service provider. I've seen some safety programs that they feel as though they're the compliance police, and they don't recognize that they're actually providing a service to the institution. So how to resolve that problem? I understand why it's not moving forward here. We seem to be locked up here. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here for a second and figure out. Let's see, for some reason, the PowerPoint, I guess today we're cursed, right? Something seems to be locked up there. Now I can't even share the screen.
Bob, we can see your screen.
Okay.
Just appears that well, now we can't, but
yeah,
good there for a second. It was just the Zoom page.
Right. Okay, let's try this. Okay. All right. Can you?
Yes, sir.
Can you see that? So let me go up one. Okay, there we go. Okay. So what's the solution to this problem? We need to establish the service orientation expectation as a condition of continued employment. That's a polite term there, by the way. In other words, let's be crystal clear. If you want to work here, we are a service provider. We are not the police, and we're going to work with people. And you're going to see some common themes here in a second, but perform periodic client satisfaction surveys to confirm service delivery. And I'm happy to share those with you. We do one client satisfaction survey a year, targeted to different groups. So we actually have data to show that we've surveyed the faculty, that uses radioactive material, for example, and we can prove that they're happy humans. Number two, I see this all the time. EH&S program staff who don't truly understand how universities work. They can't even utter what the 3 core missions of a university is, and they can't describe what it is that really irritates faculty. The solution to that is to provide training on how universities operate and establish that service expectation as a condition of employment. Again, that's being polite, by the way, and then conducting periodic client satisfaction surveys. And by the way, anybody who wants, I'm happy to share with you the presentation we made on the basics of how universities work. We actually use that in our EH&S Academy that we conduct here. Number three, EH&S programs that are reluctant to accept the key denominator that drives staffing and budget, which by the way, happens to be total net assignable square footage. I can now prove that in spades based on 5 independent projects that we've conducted. Dr. Otu Yin-Yang is on this call, and others may be, I don't know, that have participated in these projects, but is statistically clear time and time again based on objective benchmarking data that there is a clear statistical relationship between EH&S staffing and budget as compared to total net assignable square footage. Yet most safety people do not know what their total net assignable square footage is. And so we need to establish the expectation as we collect data on what it is we do, make sure we compare that to the denominator for total net assignable square footage. And by the way, I'll pause there and say, I get a call probably every 2 weeks from an administrator, and they just want to know how much of the stuff I'm supposed to have. And not knowing anything about the campus, I can tell them 30 to 40 cents per square foot per total net assignable square footage will get you in the ballpark pretty quick. We can have a side conversation about that if you like. Another weird one to encounter is they'll have various institutional safety committees, but they'll be predominantly staffed by non-faculty. And this is problematic because it loses this issue of shared governance when developing and implementing policies. So the solution to this is make sure that these committees have faculty representation. And one way to do that is to obtain members via request to department chairs, deans, and the president and the like. But it's important for the faculty to feel as though their voices are being heard with regard to some of these safety issues. We see an absence of a systematic routine surveillance, safety surveillance program, and the provision of feedback and trend data to the safety committees and leadership. So our suggestion is establish a baseline for assessments. So I'll tell you what my guarantee to the president here is we will visit every workspace and have a piece of paper to produce around this campus that's no greater than 1 year old. So if something goes wrong, we will be able to produce a piece of paper that say we were there within the last year. And that may not be possible for certain campuses and their size and their staffing, but even if that defined time period is 3 years, even if it's only superficial checks to be able to show that the institution was demonstrating due diligence to go out and check on work sites on a routine schedule is very, very important. Similarly, we currently see an absence of a codified escalated enforcement policy. In other words, when things go wrong, how is it to be handled? What's really important here is to codify it, but then to get buy-in from the faculty and make sure the faculty agree with the policy. Because the last thing, when you have a recalcitrant faculty member, the last thing you want is for them to have to go in front of their own peers and explain, why can't you do your wipe tests, or why can't you label your waste right, or whatever it is. So you want to adopt a codified policy with faculty input and then work with the faculty to avoid using it. And if used, you want to rely on the faculty to enforce. And by the way, I've been here almost 30 years, and we have one of these policies, and I'm happy to share with you. But I think we've only used it twice, and it's never gone beyond step 2. So it's quite powerful to have. Number 7, EH&S programs that immediately lament that they are understaffed, but cannot demonstrate the optimal use of current staff and what's getting done. I haven't been to in 40 campuses, I haven't been to a single one who said I'm overstaffed. Every one of them says they're understaffed, but then when I start asking them, what do you do? I get this long story, and they don't have data to lay out in front and say, here's what we're doing, but here's what's not getting done. So that's really, really important. So we want to collect and display data on work accomplished, along with benchmark data, and then how it compares to ultimate outcomes, which I'll get to in a little bit. Again, the absence of valid EH&S program benchmark data. We've done a lot of work with Shima in this regard to justify staffing and resources. Dr. Ing-Yang may be able to weigh in on this one. We're getting this paper hopefully pushed over the goal line that will include an online calculator that is based on these 5 or 6 different studies that we've done, where each individual can actually enter their vital statistics for their campus, and you can get an estimate for what the staffing and budget industry average would be. So we want to collect activity and performance data, and then we want to make sure we share that with the safety committees and leadership. That's another shortcoming I see, is that if someone has activity data, but then they don't share it with the biosafety committee, for example. And that's the only time you really have the ability to tell the story to the faculty that are on the biosafety committee to say, gosh, there's a whole lot of stuff that's behind the scenes that goes on to make the biosafety program run. I see this a lot. EH&S programs that fixate on exception to the rule rather than the larger trends, and that results in paralysis by analysis and nothing getting done. Oh, we can't do that. So this brings up this notion of the 50 questions. And this is probably a topic for a whole other webinar, but what we did was sat down and laid out what we wanted, the basics, what we wanted every person in our department, we got 32 people, what we want everybody in the department to at least know these basics. And by the way, that's part of their performance review. You have to be able to answer any of the 50 questions, but you can carry the printout with you. I don't really care. But the point is, we want to make sure you know the basics. So things such as how to address a fire alarm, how to handle a needle stick, how do you monitor for tritium, just some basic stuff, right? And again, I'm happy to share the 50 questions with you, and I'd welcome your feedback on what your impression of that is, but it's turned out to be very successful for us. And this really goes to the interdisciplinary approach, because it's been powerful to show upper management that this is how we train all our troopers, and anyone can go out and do a lab inspection. So in other words, we don't have 5 different people trooping into a lab. Here's the basic things we're going to check on. And if you get in over your head, you know the specialist that you can call. And it really goes back to that notion of the 50 questions. So again, train people on the 50 questions, set the expectations for knowledge of answers, and then have all staff involved in routine surveillance, because that's really the key to success. Another one I find is that there seems to be a failure to arrive on baseline consensus. And I think this is where Shima could come in, on the simple things that a safety person could check in a lab workplace, which would serve as the basis for a routine surveillance program. So it needn't get that exotic, but at least in my travels, they seem to get so tied up in what to check that they're overlooking the basics. And so maybe the first cut should just be, here's the basics. So train on the 50 questions, set the expectation, and then have staff involved. This was the big one, EH&S programs that cannot readily display data about their activities and outcomes. I get in meetings with people and I ask them, what do they do? And I don't think I've encountered one yet where someone shows up and says, here's our data, tell me what it is you want to know in a concise manner. Here's what we do. And by the way, if you get a chance to see this video at the end of this thing, I'm not going to show it on this, but if you get a chance, take a look at that. So we want to set expectations for the collection of key data that can be readily displayed at a moment's notice. In other words, not saying, oh, we have that data, but it's buried somewhere in a system that it will take us 2 weeks to assemble. That's not what we want. We want to be able to say, here it is now. This is what we do. Tell me what it is you don't want us to do. This is what we do. Another big one, the EH&S programs that do not synthesize information, but rather push it out to the community and then expect compliance. The job of the safety program is to synthesize that information to say, hey, here's a new rule, or here's an adjustment to the rule. Here's what we got to do to accommodate it. I won't use the word comply, because comply is a toxic term in university environment. But so we want to don't allow this to happen. Synthesize the information for the community and assist in accomplishing what needs to be done. This is another fascinating one to me. EH&S programs with little or no knowledge of workers' compensation or property insurance processes and costs. And I always get this, in this peer review we did 2 weeks ago. Oh, well, that's in another unit. We don't do that. Well, yeah, I get it, but that's kind of important stuff to know, because that's one of your ultimate outcomes. So I'm not saying you have to take over workers' comp, but I am saying you need to be apprised of that data. So we should provide training on the linkage to losses in the EH&S role. And I'm going to get to in a moment, this notion of the North Star for the ultimate outcome measures for the EH&S program, of which one of them is workers' comp and property insurance, because those are ultimate outcomes that are really, really important for the institution. And then the last one is kind of interesting, and that is EH&S program directors that lack experience or knowledge in certain aspects. And so they don't know what the units are doing. And what I mean by that is I'll meet a well-intentioned EH&S director, but to be quite honest, they have no earthly idea what radiation safety does, or they don't really know what hazardous waste people do. They know they got to get it done, but they really don't know what it is they do. And so I would argue that they should, upon hiring a director or whatever the title might be, that's an important question to ask, is tell me about your experience in these different settings and understanding. And if the person's already there, then make sure that you allocate resources to be trained to at least understand the basics of what these different units do. That's really, really important. And I'll give you a good example. I fell asleep in a meeting and I woke up and inherited risk management insurance. I didn't know anything about this stuff. And so I was able to successfully make the argument, I got to get trained in the field of risk management to understand what it is they do. And it's actually turned out to be quite powerful. So we always recommend for the EH&S program director, if you're not comfortable being over, let's say, occupational health, for example, or pick whatever problem of the day, then perhaps you should, as finances allow, you should focus on a continuing education training in that area, so at least you know what the heck it is that they do. Okay, so that's the top 15 things that we have encountered over, I don't know, 25 years or so. But now I want to provide some commentary. And commentary number one is that universities have experienced some significant sentinel events in the past, which suggest, does the prospect or expectation of EH&S program accreditation loom in the future? And what I mean by that is back in 1965, ALAC was formed, which is for laboratory animal care. It's not a regulatory group, but it is a group of people who work in the field that assess others. And this was driven by the anti-vivisectionist movement in the 60s, where animal care was less than up to par in certain settings. And that drove this notion of voluntary accreditation. In 2001, there was an unfortunate event that occurred, I believe it was in Pennsylvania. I think the individual's name was Jesse Gelsinger, who was a healthy participant in a research study who unfortunately passed away. And that led to much rancor and then the development of AHARP. And AHARP is for Human Research Protections. And again, it's a voluntary accreditation, but it does kind of give you the dolphin safe tuna label there. And then in 2010, the US Chemical Safety Board reviewed a series of university lab accidents after the tragic event with Miss Sengi at UCLA. And I thought, to be quite honest, at this point, I thought this is probably going to be the sentinel event that will drive program accreditation expectations for EH&S programs, given their complexity. So I guess what I would just proffer is, as a profession, are we collectively poised for this eventuality? And I think this is something that SHIMA could consider, because I think the programs are best evaluated by those who know the business, rather than sending some auditor or compliance person in to see what's going on. And I'll wrap up here in a little bit about hopefully people that are on this call that maybe have undergone a peer review and get their feedback. Number two is just my commentary, is that there seems to be a universally absent North Star for EH&S programs to gauge their ultimate outcomes. And I've gone through 6 presidents here at the university, and I can tell you that our balanced scorecard seems to be universal. It makes sense, because I meet with the president once a year, and these 4 categories. Number 1 is losses. How many people got hurt and how much property got damaged? Number 2 is compliance. How many inspections occurred? Last year, we had 16 inspections of different agencies. And what's the status? How are we doing? And then we go around and do internal stuff. That's what safety people do. Third area is finances. How much do we spend? And then how much cost avoidance or revenues do we generate? And then that is balanced out with measured client satisfaction, not complaining in the elevator, but actually targeted, measured client satisfaction to see, do the clients feel they can access safety? Can they get the services they need? Do they feel safe at work? That sort of stuff. And then equally important, the internal department staff with the safety program. How are they doing? Do they feel supported? Are they able to grow their careers and that sort of stuff? I'm going to argue that these 4 areas are the North Star for EH&S programs in universities. And I'd welcome your commentary as we wrap up here in a second. So what are the opportunities for SHIMA? Perhaps targeted courses or presentations in the prospect or benefit of participation in peer reviews. I think, again, underscoring the term collegial. Maybe formalized, and I think we've done this in the past, I don't remember, but actually courses or presentations on how universities operate. That can be in person or could be virtual. Happy to do that if people are interested. It doesn't have to come from me, but I'm happy to do it. Also, perhaps a presentation on the 50 questions and associated training on that. Maybe the SHEMA could consider the possible program accreditation task force built upon some previous efforts and other models. I know that there has been some nascent efforts in this regard, but change occurs and it just doesn't happen. But it's something I think that SHEMA should think about. And then we certainly want to encourage people to focus on these benchmarking participation projects that we've undertaken, and then the analysis and interpretation. So those are the sorts of things that I see that perhaps SHEMA leadership can consider based on these observations from 40 peer reviews. So to wrap up, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions here. University programs operate within a realm of 3 practical realities: constant comparisons, constant change, and the need to capture and display data for both compliance and program performances. Collegial peer reviews conducted by experienced and practical practitioners can be much more effective and less adversarial way to assess EH&S program operations and performance for continuous quality improvement. A common set of EH&S program issues are apparent that fortunately can be easily addressed, I believe. And then I think there's ample professional development training opportunities that exist in this realm that SHEMA could consider as part of its strategic planning to enhance the entire profession. So your questions and comments are welcomed. Specifically, if you've undergone a peer review, I'm curious, was it helpful or harmful? But your experiences or our collective experiences are valuable feedback because we're all in this boat together. If you're interested, there's a YouTube video. They've hired this clever guy who made a little 4-minute video that describes our program here. That's that link if you're interested. And then there's my email information at the bottom there. So I will stop yapping at this point. Again, I apologize for the hiccup in getting started, but happy to address. It looks like there's some things that have come in. I don't know if somebody's fielding those or somebody help me on that one.
Yeah, I got you, Bob. No worries. Okay. Something I was going to discuss with you beforehand, but obviously we got off to a rough start. So, yeah. And everybody, I apologize for that. That's on me too for not getting that figured out. But I do appreciate everybody bearing with us with the technical difficulties to start there and getting started late. But yeah, there have been a couple of questions that have come in, Bob. Mm-hmm. I had one to start with, and then I see that some other folks are getting some in, but you'd mentioned that, you thought this was an effort as far as the accreditation type of a program that SHEMA should really start taking a look at. Where do you envision that to start in terms of just the brainstorming of that effort? And do you think that is kind of an intertwined effort between several communities of practice? Do you think a specific effort needs to be dedicated to that? And how do you see that emanating as far as the starting point is concerned?
I think the starting point would be for someone to do a little homework on how both ALAC and AHARP were created. I know what caused them to be created, but I'll bet there's some commonalities. My bet is that ALAC is kind of the gold standard, and I'll bet AHARP kind of modeled themselves after the way the ALAC process works. So if someone could at least do a little homework on that, that might help lay out how some sort of voluntary accreditation process might work. Looking at, one of the things I found interesting with ALAC is that they're not telling you exactly what to do. They just want to make sure these certain things are accomplished. And so they're respectful of the individual campus, but show us how you're meeting these objectives. So something akin to that. So that would be my suggestion, would be to start there.
Sure, yeah. John Fellers had put in the chat too that obviously this is incorporated into SHEMA's newly released strategic plan. So therefore, I'm assuming that there's been discussions obviously that have happened at the board level, as well as input from people like yourself and other folks that have useful information on where this process is to get started. I just want to make mention of that to kind of supplement what you just said. Chris is chiming in, asking with regards to benchmarking based on NASF, does that include off-campus locations, and have you assessed whether locality adjustments are material to EHS funding?
Okay, so the way we define it as of the project we've done so far, the definition is the square footage to which you provide services. Okay, we have been unable to collect valid data to speak to that second point, which is how distally located some of these spots might be. My hunch is it impacts things, but let's go back and be clear. There's a difference between gross square footage and total net assignable. So, gross square footage includes things such as parking decks and the hallways and the bathrooms and stuff like that. But at least from the work that we've done, total net assignable square footage, and by the way, O2, if you're on here, chime in on this one. But so total net assignable square footage is king. But if we were to get more participation from SHEMA members, my hunch is this notion of geographic distribution would play some role in the R squared value, I think. But O2, are you on or are you?
Yeah, he's definitely on. He's posted something in the chat.
Anyhow.
So, yeah.
Okay.
On the truth, the need is data. With data, we can answer those questions. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a parameter that we'd have to just come up with a metric to speak to. The how do you summarize distal location? What's the furthest campus away you have, or what? I don't know the answer to that. But we have not. Just to be frank, we have not found any parameter in that regard that's popped up statistically significant as powerful as total net assignable square footage. And I do want to pause there and say, because when we bring people in here to do the EH&S Academy, we'll ask them how big is their campus. And we'll get all these goofy measures: how many students, how many employees, how many buildings, how many acres. And that's what really drove us towards doing this project. And what I find fascinating is time and time again, the most important predictor is total net assignable square footage. But I dare say half the people on this call don't know what theirs is. And yet that's probably the most important denominator. So that's something we really need to get across to folks, is because, I don't know what it is in universities, but every time we build a new building, it's 500,000 square feet. I don't know if they come out of a cookie cutter or what the deal is. It's always 500,000 square feet. But now that we know that, I can tell them exactly how much it's going to cost for the budget. And I can tell you what it's going to cost for, and say, here's the magic numbers: 4 FTE per million square feet and 40 cents a square foot. I can get you in the ballpark pretty darn quick. And that's so powerful that other, I don't know, I think the safety profession would benefit from at least, there's always going to be nuances, but at least give me a starting point for this thing.
Okay, thanks. And I think some of this next question might be addressed at least peripherally by what you just said, and I think it could be irrespective of either a small or a big school. But Margaret is asking specifically about, as a small school, where would you recommend we should start? I'm looking for bite-sized pieces to help get started and to maintain progress, as this is useful information. So do you have anything specific to the small school aspect of this?
Well, for both small and large, I would suggest that you take a public health approach to this and look at, in public health, they always use this concept of a logic model, right? So you've got inputs. So in our profession, it's number of staff and budget. And then on the other end, you've got outcomes. That's how many people got hurt, how much property, those 4 things, right? Those, at the end of the day, that's the input and that's the outcomes. In the middle is all the stuff we do, lab surveys, respond to emergencies, blah, 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 blah. So what I would do is map that out and then be able to answer the question, what's not getting done? And I ask that question when we do peer reviews, and sometimes I get blank stares, or they can't point to, here's our inputs, here's our outcomes, and here's the stuff we're doing, but here's what's not getting done. That's very powerful. And so that would be my suggestion.
Okay, thanks for addressing that. And John Feller is asking about what revenue streams have you seen common among the EH&S groups that you've peer reviewed?
Well, one of the big ones is collecting data on cost avoidance. And what I mean by that is, and I'm sure everybody on this call is involved with storage for decay for radioactive material, acid-base neutralization, chemical reuse. So to be able to quantify that and be able to demonstrate that is very, very important. But in addition, we actually go out and do training courses, and we generate revenue doing that stuff. Because I'm 20% faculty, I actually bring in money from grants and stuff like that. I don't know if people are doing that or not, but I would, with regard to revenues, what I would suggest is think about cost avoidance and quantifying that. Because so a good example would be to be able to show that your workers' comp rates are below the industry average. There's actually reduction in workers' comp rates to that. That's a very powerful story to tell.
Okay. I'm sure, Bob, you can speak to this, but O2 also might be a more relevant question and statement for him. But Tim is saying the prevailing EHS staff to NASF ratio would be nice to know. Is the SHEMA benchmarking data available to members? And then states that, thought it would be available to schools that participated by, that were providing this data.
Mm-hmm.
So O2, I don't know if you have any information on that based on your relevance to that and closeness to that part of it.
Well, I'll answer part of that question. So we've written a paper that summarizes the 5 different projects we've done and submitted to the Journal of Chemical Health and Safety. I just have the markups back. One reviewer said accept outright. The other one had some comments. I made the comments and it is being uploaded today. It is hopefully, but included in this paper is the online calculator that actually O2 made, by the way, based on his project. And so once it would be nice for people to be able to say, if it all goes well, that here's a peer-reviewed paper that describes these relationships, and here's a calculator that at least get us in the ballpark. But again, I just want to be clear, we've done all this benchmarking stuff, but that's only speaking to inputs. It's only speaking to the number of people in the budget. It's not speaking to the outcomes. And that's one of the things I think SHEMA ought to really hammer on, is that we need this North Star of what are the ultimate outcomes of the safety program. Because then you get that middle part, which is what is it we should be doing in order to achieve those ultimate outcomes and comparisons there. So if you go to that video, go to that video at the end and take 4 minutes, get a cup of coffee and take 4 minutes, and you can see our operation and how it all flows down into the ultimate outcomes. And then you'll see the hats. We every time we do a peer review, we require them to give us a hat. So you'll see the collection of hats.
Sounds good. Jerry, I see that you're unmuted. Did you have a question or a statement that you wanted to make?
We share the data, benchmarking and salary survey. We share the data with the people that participate, and then we're working on whether or not we can give it out publicly, more publicly to the members.
Okay, thank you for that. O2 is asking this, and I'm sure he probably knows this based upon his relationship to you, Bob, but I think it would be relevant for everybody to hear. Can you speak to how the EHS department offices can change the conversation from being seen as a sunk or an undesirable cost relative to being an investment in their institution?
Yeah, I mean, there's many ways to do that, but I think you need to be willing to go in front of what I'll call the firing squad, right? So in our institution, there's kind of 3, I describe it as 3 fire ant mounds. We've got one fire ant mound is the classified staff council, right? And then there's the faculty council, and then there's the student council. And these people are quite energetic about whatever it is they want to do. So when something goes wrong, or even volunteer to go in front of them and explain what it is we got going on, take COVID as a good example, to have a face presence and look them in the eye and tell them, why we're here. We're a service organization and we're here to help you, but here's the challenges we face. Safety can't be done from behind a desk. You got to get out there and meet the folks and make them understand that we truly want you to go home as healthy and as safe as came in the door. That's really, really important. And I think that's a good first step.
Awesome, thank you. Mary's asking about, does your formula include IT resources to support platforms that EHS uses to support the university, or are those IT resources provided in a different way from the university?
It is reflective of whatever comes out of the EH&S budget, because all we ask for is what is the EH&S budget and how many people do you have? So each thing may vary. It may be that for some organization it's centrally funded and they don't pay for it. And whereas others, you pay for it out of your own budget. But I would argue that all comes out in the wash when I think O2 helped me on this. I think at the height, one of these projects we did, it was 102 people responded, 102 institutions responded. O2's project in particular, I think, was impacted because of the COVID deal. But what would you have, 50 or 60? I don't remember O2.
65.
How many?
65.
65. Yeah. So I think when you get an N up to that, it's going to come out in the wash. So.
Awesome. Marcus chimes in, says, in 4 FTE per million square foot equation, would you account for full-time on-site contractors differently than hired FTEs?
My intuition, we did not measure contractors, although in Bruce Brown's project, we did define any contractors that are greater than 50% time were counted as an FTE. But to me, whether they're employed by the institution or whether they are a contractor, 4 FTE per million square feet will get you in the ballpark one way or another. I personally would prefer having an employee of the university rather than a contractor, only because they have ownership. And I'll tell you, this is a raw topic for me because I got some buddies that work down at NASA and they rely on contractors for everything. And the problem with that is that all the work is limited to the scope of the contract. So you and I, we walk down the hallway and stuff. How many times do we have stopped or, stupid stuff, right? But I would argue you respond to that and help out. That builds relationship with the safety program and openness. But if it's a bunch of contractors that say, oh, I don't do that, I only do this, and that can be very, very problematic. So I would just discourage institutions leaning towards contractors. I understand each one can be a little different, but I would stick to the crude 4 FTE per million square feet, whether it's in-house or contractor. That number again will get you in the ballpark.
Okay, awesome. Brian Payne, I know there's a couple things, maybe we got a few minutes left if you wanted to chime in and ask Bob or O2 any questions. I don't know if you'd like to do that or not, but I know you've hit me with a couple of different questions and comments that you have that might be better addressed coming directly from you.
Yeah, no, and I just had thrown those out there in case you needed a time filler, but it looks like everybody has done a great job of asking questions that are very in depth. Mine was just, it wasn't really a question as much as, well, it is a question of whether or not Bob's had success at bringing in EH&S softwares and justifying that, because in a previous life, I was in industry and it's really, the EH&S softwares were a significant part of being able to keep our hands wrapped around the global problem. It was a global company. And I just, it seems like maybe the EH&S softwares that are focused and really targeting the academia right now are a little bit behind on that. So I was just wondering if you had, had any success in justifying software to kind of help you out on that FTE side of the house.
Actually, it's interesting you bring this up because one of the things I was very interested in, and I'll do the survey one day, I'll put O2 on it or something, but the notion of how much FTE equivalent is one of these software programs. First of all, I ain't seen a robot that can do safety yet, by the way, just so we're crystal clear. I ain't seen a robot picking up waste. I ain't seen a robot cleaning up spills or handling irate faculty. But what my professional hunch is that with regard to these computer systems, depending on their sophistication, you're looking at 1 to 2 FTE equivalent. And so of course we get the department together once a week and we chat. And of course they all whine and moan about whatever this thing is with the computer system. I'm like, great, okay, so I just need 2 people to get laid off. Who wants to get laid off? And we get the slickest system you got, right? So, it's a fine line, that this age-old balance of do you build your own or do you buy off the shelf? But my gut feeling is, and by the way, I will tell you this. Let me pause for a second here, because it looks like you've got a few minutes. In these peer reviews, what I see time and time again, if you look at the budget of these organizations, 65 to 70% of the budget is for payroll. Okay, that's the biggest chunk. The second biggest chunk, about 15%, is hazardous waste disposal. The third biggest chunk, if it's not IT, that causes my ears to perk up. Because what that says to me is that this is perhaps too paper-based or clunky and perhaps hasn't been automated. I'd welcome other people's commentary on that. I don't have data to prove that, but it's just from my experience. Number one's payroll, number two is hazardous waste. And if number three ain't IT or information management, then that causes me to say, let's look at how these processes work for what it's worth.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the questions, and certainly appreciate you guys kicking in some additional comments there too. Dr. Bob, thanks again for presenting on this. I think I've seen this in various iterations that you've done over the years. I think it's always useful to be reminded of a lot of this information, and for those that haven't heard it before, certainly to be kind of enlightened to a different way that they might be able to approach this issue and trying to tackle this. As Dr. Bob usually always puts out to everybody, you guys see him post on the forum, and he's pretty easy to get a hold of, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to entertain any of your questions offline. Reach out via email. I know a lot of people have posted in the chat that, you know, they may have missed part of this, especially due to our technical difficulties. Katie and Shima Central Office will make sure that all that stuff gets made retroactively or made available to you rather via the email follow-up that you'll get after this. And there's a link to the 50 questions handout that Bob was referencing earlier as well. And we'll be sure to try to, again, disperse that information along with the post-session survey that will be sent out so that you guys have that in a number of different formats. And whenever the recorded session is available for any of you that may have missed a part of it, or if anybody else was not able to log on due to the technical difficulties that we had, you know, please, by all means, make sure that they get that link so that they can watch it proactively or retroactively rather. And also go check out that YouTube link that Bob's been referencing. 4.5 minutes, like he said, over a cup of coffee. Shouldn't take too much of your time, probably very, very useful to catch it in a short snippet. So that being said, any other closing thoughts from you, Dr. Bob, or are we all good to wrap up?
Yeah. So thanks everyone again. Apologize for the hiccups at the beginning, but if at some future date, if we want to set up a session speaking specifically to the 50 questions, I'm happy to do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Yes, absolutely.
We have a canned presentation on it, and we can get the 50 questions out. So happy to do it.
Wonderful.
Okay.
All right, guys, have a great rest of your Thursday, great rest of your week, and hopefully see you all, whether it's virtual or in person, sometime soon. Bye, everybody.